Hello everybody, I'm KC and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. And welcome back to Look Back at The Lion King. This time we're looking at the sequel that no one really asked for, but turned out to be pretty good. The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride. Simba's Pride was only the 6th direct-to-video Disney sequel to be released, so this was before the whole thing got kinda ridiculous. I'm not sure if these sequels had the horrible reputation they do now, though personally I'll take these things over the live-action remakes any day, but even today, Simba's Pride is regarded as one of the best and is definitely the most beloved out of all of them. Does it deserve that sort of praise? Well, let's take a look. This time, the movie follows the next would-be ruler of the Pride Land, Simba's daughter Kiara, as she grows up under Simba's careful and watchful eye, and running into some interesting new characters who she has to decide if they're her friends or enemies. Simba's Pride is sort of significant among the direct-to-video sequels. You see, all of these movies have like 4 plots among them. The genuine right after the first movie sequel, the midquel, the backdoor pilot, or the one introduced in this movie, the Next Generation sequel, where the main couple from the original movie have a kid who's now the focus. And despite how many movies with similar premises followed, Simba's Pride is probably still the best of them. One thing that you notice right away is that this is going to be a different experience from the first movie, even though on paper it opens in a very similar way, with the traditional cub raising to welcome the royal newborn. But what's different about it this time is that it's much calmer. The movie doesn't open with a grand, powerful song to the ever-expansive backdrop of the African wilds. The opening this time is more intimate in a way, likely because of the limited budget compared to the original, but they used it to their advantage, having the animals slowly gather in unison before the sun even rises this time. Even the opening song, He Lives in You, is a much more relaxing song than the grand circle of life, though it's still an amazing song with all the best traits of a Lion King song. Unique composition, a beautiful blend of English and African lyrics, and Le Bohem's iconic vocal performance. On the technical side, the whole movie in terms of coloring is not nearly as vibrant as its predecessor. That doesn't make it bad by any stretch though. It still has the great command of changes in environment, creating atmosphere with things like shadows and natural lighting. It works as well as the first movie does at creating a world that feels alive, but the cooler color choices does take a minute to get used to, and I'm not quite sure if it's a creative choice or due to the smaller budget. Also, the characters are a shade or two darker than they were before, and that was always weird to me. The character animation still does an excellent job at taking the movements of animals and incorporating it into the character movements to make it look more natural. One of my favorite little touches is how much more frequently the lions use their claws. And the new character designs, all of which are lions this time, are very appealing and distinct and sit comfortably next to the characters we know and love. While it's obvious the team and budget on this movie were smaller, it doesn't cheapen the quality in a distracting way. They worked really hard to make this feel like the Pride Lands again, and for the most part, they succeed. The presentation in this movie is different, not bad, and they clearly pushed their resources to the limit to keep up with the integrity of The Lion King from an artistic standpoint. Getting into the story properly, we see the early days of Simba and Nala's daughter Kiara, who is both very much like her parents and quite a bit different. She definitely shares the trait they both had as cubs of being very outgoing and adventurous, wanting to run off and explore even against her parents' wishes, but mostly Simba's. She's a very fun and endearing character right from the start, and shows that when she does get into trouble with a basque of crocodiles, that she's pretty good at handling herself when she gets into reckless situations. The biggest difference between her and Simba, though, is that Kiara doesn't want to be queen. Where Simba saw the idea of ruling, empowering, and freeing when he was younger, Kiara finds it restrictive, in a life where she already feels like she doesn't get the chance to decide things for herself. Basically,
I want adventure in the great wide somewhere.
For a good chunk of the movie, and through the duet she shares with her father, she wonders if she could figure out who she is beyond just the role she's destined to fill. It's a good contrast to Simba's attitude at the beginning of his story, and while the movie doesn't go as deep into this topic as it could have, it's a nice start to Kiara's own journey, and it does have a decent payoff, but we'll get to that later. And I want to give a shout out to Timon and Pumbaa's roles in this movie, who stuck around in the Pride Lands after Simba became king and are now Kiara's babysitters / overbearing uncles. I really like this role for these two, and how much they've still got Simba's back by looking after his daughter. Their banter is still delightful, and while not every joke lands, a lot of them do. And I think the role of well-meaning yet underqualified guardians is always perfect for them. During Kiara's journey in the beginning of the movie, she encounters a pair of lions living in the Outlands, Kovu, who we'll elaborate on later, and his mother, Zira, played deviously by Suzanne Pleshette. Apparently, Scar had followers during his time as king who were still loyal to him even after he was dethroned by Simba.
Who has made us outsiders?
Simba!
Who killed Scar?
Simba!
Well, technically the hyenas killed Scar, but they're not in this movie, so who cares, I guess? Some people say this is kind of contrived, or think it doesn't make any sense after how the land wound up under Scar's rule, but I actually really like this idea. No matter how horrible a leader is to most, they still have followers. And Zira appears to have been the most loyal to Scar, since not only is she the leader of the banished lions, but her youngest son was chosen by Scar to take his place, as the chosen one. I see that even up to the end, Scar had a flair for the dramatic. There's something unsettling about Zira from the second she shows up on screen, and she proves to be a more than effective villain. Like, this lady is too scary for a direct-to-video sequel. While she doesn't have the same body count as Scar, you get the sense she'd be far less hesitant than him to rip someone's throat out if she had something to gain from it. She delights and even finds pride in even just the idea of the pain and destruction of her enemies, illustrated excellently and brutally in her song, My Lullaby. Imagine if My Favorite Things from Sound of Music was sung by Hannibal Lecter. This is probably what you get. While Zira is dramatic during the numbers, she never reaches Saturday morning cartoon villain levels of camp. I always found her menacing, determined, and slightly terrifying in her bloodlust. And most of that comes from the disturbing lyrics written by Joss Whedon? Yeah, Joss Whedon wrote a Disney villain song. I'd be more surprised, but I'm more curious if writing this is what inspired Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog.
A symphony of death, oh my! That's my lullaby!
It's a brand new day, and the sun is high. All the birds are singing that you're gonna die.
Anyway, you've all been patient, let's talk a bit about Kovu. During his time as a cub, Kovu has an interesting way of being presented in the film. We first meet him when Kiara does, when she wanders into the Outlands, and you can tell that he's different even before we find out what exactly he is. Raising questions like, why is a lion in the Outlands, and why his fur is darker like someone else we might know. But once what he is does come to light, we see he's not like the other outsiders either. He's quieter, and while he may seem ready for a fight, is easily intimidated by the bigger lions like his mother and Simba, showing that, like Kiara, he doesn't really fit comfortably among his kind, and is pressured into filling a role set out for him, just a much, much darker role than Kiara's. And as much as he tries to fill that role, and for a while believes it's the right path for him through all the training Zira put him through as he grows up, during the time he spends with Kiara as he's trying to find a way to take down Simba, he begins to enjoy his time with her. At this point, it's probably worth mentioning the obvious. Since the original Lion King was often compared to and somewhat inspired by Hamlet, it was decided to use Romeo and Juliet as inspiration for the plot of the sequel. It's an incredibly loose adaptation, of course. Spoiler, Kiara and Kovu don't die at the end, but it is something that comes to mind when you watch this movie or even just hear what it's about. Kiara and Kovu and their relationship is easily the most beloved thing about this movie. Like, people really love Kiara and Kovu. Especially Kovu. Their blossoming relationship and who they are as characters is arguably what's made this movie so enduring, and they do have a great connection. They're both lonely and feel misunderstood, with neither of them having non-family related friends. At least Simba had Nala. And not only do they both feel like something is missing, but they both have something to offer the other. One of the most endearing scenes in the movie is when Kovu tries to teach Kiara to hunt, and then runs around chasing birds with her, Timon and Pumbaa. Kovu helps Kiara hone her skills that she she hasn't been able to perfect, and Kiara shows him how to loosen up and have fun. They both gain something from knowing each other, which is important in a relationship. I do also have to attribute some of Kiara and Kovu's appeal to the chemistry between the voice actors. Neve Campbell and Jason Marsden both give excellent performances and just work really well together, even though it's very likely they were never in the same room together. The only issue with it, though, is that it starts to happen kinda quickly. You know the old joke that Disney couples tend to get married after 3 days? Well, in this movie, Kovu is ready to kill Simba at sunrise, and then by sunset, he's necking his daughter. As much as I love Kiara and Kovu, watching this movie again made me realize that it all happens kinda suddenly. With both of them facing issues of how to live up to predetermined destinies, it could have been something for them to bond over and maybe figure out together. Kovu opens up a bit to Kiara about his messed up connections to Scar, but Kiara never really opens up to Kovu, and I would have loved to have seen him support her as well. I imagine this could have been alleviated with a longer story, but sometimes the runtime is what it is. Still, they make a very sweet couple that really connected with audiences, and them getting together leads to the only cartoony fantasy-based musical number in the movie, Upendi, now sung by Rafiki, which is a little weird, and it's not the best song in the movie, but it's definitely fun and gives us another simple Swahili lesson for the kids. And it's kind of funny watching Rafiki play matchmaker for the greater good, especially when he's conspiring with Mufasa's silent spirit to do it. And I do find it kind of amusing just how much they emphasize that while Kovu is Scar's successor, he's not his son. You know, just so we're all clear that they're not related and this isn't creepy.
Kovu. Scar wasn't even his father. He just took him in.
He wasn't my father, but he was still part of me.
But while our new leads get some great moments together, some of the supporting cast goes a bit underexposed. While Ziri and Simba have great conflict with their children and each other, and I love Timon and Pumbaa's time in this movie, the rest of the group kind of suffers from neglect because of how many new characters there are to focus on. Zazu is still there, but he barely does anything. I don't even think he says a word to Kiara, which is odd given how much he had to look out for Simba when he was younger. I kind of wish Timon and Pumbaa had to work together to keep an eye on Kiara. Now that would have been fun. And poor Nala hardly has any involvement. On the one hand, the moments she does get are great, reminding Simba that Kiara is just like him when he was younger, helping Simba gain some perspective when he sees Kiara and Kovu close together. The latter is one of the sweetest moments in the movie to me. But for standout moments, that's kinda it. Which is a real shame because Nala was such an anchor and good at helping Simba get his act together. And he could really use some act getting togethering at certain points in this movie. I would have been willing to give up some Timon and Pumbaa antics if Nala got to talk to Simba before that final fight. Even some new characters go underdeveloped, like Vitani, Kovu's sister, who I think she shares one line with. Vitani still has a decent presence in the movie, and her moments are good ones, but I wish she maybe had an exchange with her brother in the middle of this whole mess, or even glanced at him when some of the more serious stuff goes down. But again, I guess there's only so much time. Someone who does get a lot of screen time, conflict, and development is Simba. Or should I say, the overprotective dad trope done right. As I've said, throughout the film, Simba is very watchful of his daughter. The reason he constantly has Timon and Pumbaa following her is because he's worried she's going to get hurt. But what makes this compelling and not cliche is that we know the reason Simba is acting like this. Because he doesn't want to lose another family member because of his neglect. And if that wasn't obvious, here's a nightmare sequence where he has to relive his father's death. You know, for kids. He's not defensive around Kovu because he doesn't want a boy near his little girl, but because that boy is the protege of the lion who ruined his life. And given what Kovu was sent to the Pride Lands to do, Simba was actually kind of justified in his hesitation. But even with him being overly cautious, he's still a good dad, and a good king for that matter. One of the most satisfying things about this movie is seeing Simba take charge and pass on life lessons as king. Even having a good sense of community with his subjects, like taking the lionesses out to defend the land with him, or seeing the other animals follow his example. It's a good contrast to Mufasa, who mostly seemed to handle things himself. Simba's big song in the movie, We Are One, is a great personal moment between him and Kiara, as he shows that the circle of life means that we all have a path in it, and there's more to understand as long as we're willing to understand each other, which ends up being the thesis of the movie. But while we're on the song, Does it bug anyone else that Matthew Broderick never got to sing for Simba? In the first one, I kinda get it. Broderick wasn't known for his musical talent. But by this point, the guy had won a Tony. Why didn't he get to do Simba's big song? Just wondering. Let's move on. Just because he's overprotective and has his own issues doesn't mean he's unreasonable. Once he gains some eloquent perspective from Nala and he sees how much Kovu and Kiara care about each other, he's willing to give him a chance, showing that even if he carries the weight of it with him, Simba has learned from his past, portrayed excellently in his moment with Kovu with possibly the best line in the movie.
Sometimes what's left behind can grow better than the generation before. If given the chance.
Until Zira and her group ambush Simba and everything comes crashing down immediately after that moment. Literally in one case. I haven't really mentioned Nuka up to this point because there's really not much to say beyond what's on the surface. That he's jealous of his little brother's place as Scar's successor and Zira's main focus. Frankly, the most significant contribution he makes to this movie is his death, which kind of makes him the villain version of Agent Coulson.
This was never gonna work. They didn't have something.
This accident forces drastic actions among the outsiders, especially Kovu, denouncing his loyalty to Scar, Zira more or less saying he still like him because he was responsible for his brother's death, and now there's one other way he's like Scar. Regardless of how you feel about this movie, you gotta admit, that was intense. But not nearly as intense as the next scene and how Simba and the rest of the Prylanders react towards what they believe was Kovu's treason. With a song powerful enough to force Kovu into exile, not one of us. The lyrics dripping with hatred and rejection, watching all the Prylanders gang up on Kovu at his lowest, turning the he lives in you moment from the first movie against Kovu, man, that was cold. And Simba and Kiara only contributing looks of hatred and despair. Not One of Us is a powerful moment, a great song, and arguably the most popular scene in the movie. At this point, Simba is letting his fear and ignorance get in the way of listening to his daughter. Like Nala said earlier, Simba desperately wants to walk the path expected of him. And maybe deep down, that also means not failing in any way. Like he failed his land and his people when he ran away. And as much as Kiara is beloved, I know some people think she's, well, whiny, especially with how much she goes against her father's wishes and says he's not being fair. But here's the thing, Kiara is right. Simba doesn't trust her. He doesn't know Kovu. And no matter how much he tries, he'll never be Mufasa. Nor should he try to be, and neither should Kiara. Instead of blindly following a predetermined path, Kiara speaks her mind when she feels something is wrong or unfair. She doesn't just sit around and wait for things to happen. She takes action, which is why she fell in love with Kovu, because he saw and loved her for who she was, not what she was meant to become. And that goes both ways. Kiara didn't see Scar's heir when she looked at Kovu. She just saw a lion who was fun to be around. It's the kind of affection Kovu craved in a sense, but never received from his family, despite being the most important member of their pride. I know a lot of people aren't fond of a female protagonist finding her self-worth through a romantic relationship, but I think it works here. Kovu didn't love Kiara for anything that wasn't already there. It's just her care for him that, ironically, helps her find the qualities she uses to stand up for him and herself. Essentially, they're better together than they are apart, expressed in the very sweet song Love Will Find a Way. I really like this song, and while it's probably not as good objectively, I like it just as much as Can You Feel the Love Tonight, and shows that despite how anyone else feels, they both know that they're the best of themselves together. But of course, we can't have a war between two prides without, well, a war. And like the final confrontation in the first movie, this is a pretty exciting fight, with funny and intense moments sprinkled in to make it really entertaining. And if you weren't convinced that Zira is a complete psycho, just listen to her commanding the outsiders in the battle.
For the eye! Break his jaw! Hit him low!
This goes on until Kiara and Kovu intervene, and can I just say that this is a great image? Both of them standing together side by side while facing their respective parental figures. It's so symbolic of the moment, I love it. Whoever storyboarded this, Well done. This is Kiara's shining moment. From the beginning, Kiara has been reluctant to take on the mantle of queen because she felt it would be inhibiting her freedom and the power to make her own decisions. But it's only once Kiara found something truly worth fighting for does she understand what being a ruler means. And when she reminds Simba of the lesson he taught her earlier in the movie.
A wise king once told me, "We are one." I didn't understand him then. Now I do.
If Kiara is expected to become queen, she has to learn to lead independently, even if there are times where she fails, which is something Simba has been denying her out of fear of what those failures would mean. It's only when she's willing to take charge in a way that will benefit everyone and not just her own desires does it make an impact. And it's when Simba realizes how blind he's been to change and growth for his kingdom and his daughter. It's a simple moment of revelation between them, despite how much I just rambled on about it, but it's a nice one that really ties the movie together. And I think it's a lesson that works as a good companion to the first movie. In The Lion King, it was about learning from the past to improve your future. Here, it's about not letting what happened in the past dominate your present to the point that it blinds you to the possibilities of the future.
Your future hasn't been written yet. No one's has. Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one.
And the only ones in this movie who are seen as in the wrong are the ones who fail to realize that, stuck in the past and wanting to reclaim it. Some were so stubborn about this pursuit that they paid the ultimate price, including Zira. And I know this is a really well-known bit of trivia about this movie, but it's still an interesting one, and I know I'm going to get comments about it if I don't mention it. So in the finale, Zira slips from the side of a rock and drowns in a rushing river beneath her. But originally, Zira willingly let go of the rock rather than taking Kiara's paw. Essentially, she would rather have died than accepted Kiara's help. Yeah, that's pretty dark, but I don't know. I think if any Disney franchise could have pulled that off, it would be The Lion King. But even if it isn't the deciding moment, we still see Zira refuse Kiara's help, so there are still remnants of it. In the end, as the sun rises on Pride Rock, the newly united Pride gather to watch the two royal couples roar because it looks really cool. I have no idea, really. And as James Earl Jones collects his single line check from the House of Mouse, the second chapter of The Lion King legacy concludes. So, overall, how does The Lion King 2 Simba's Pride hold up to the original? Not at all, really. I mean, The Lion King was a powerful Shakespearean epic tale among animation. There was no way a direct-to-video film was going to come close to it in scope and quality. With that said, it is a great companion piece to the original movie, because while not as compelling or daring, this felt like a natural progression from where the first movie ended, which is all a sequel really needs to be when you get down to it. It doesn't have to be as good as the first one, it just has to feel like this is the next step in the journey, and that's definitely the feeling you get from Simba's Pride. The animation is solid and is some of the best of the direct-to-video sequels. The score is very reminiscent of the original with an excellent soundtrack of collaborative songs. The voice acting is top-notch from both the new and returning players. The new characters are so appealing and memorable that most of them are as beloved as the original cast, and the story is still engaging. If anything, the only things working against Simba's Pride are the limitations of its format as a home media exclusive movie, time, and budget. At only 75 minutes, there are story ideas that either get overlooked or don't get to be explored to their potential. And as I said before, there's quite a few characters who don't get utilized as well as they could have been. If you don't include the end credits, this movie is 8 minutes shorter than its predecessor. Some might not think that's a big deal, but a lot can happen in 8 minutes, especially when you already have a strong foundation to work with. This is one of those Disney releases that I really wish came with deleted scenes or even a commentary track, because I would love to know if there were ideas that had to be cut for the sake of time, because it sure feels like it. But even if it's not seen to its full potential, Simba's Pride is still an admirable sequel and definitely earned its reputation as one of the best of this unusual lineup of films. If there's one thing to take away from this experience, is that the Pride Lands are even more rich with stories than even 2 movies could contain. Just like the original song said, there's more to be seen than can ever be seen. But that doesn't mean Disney won't try to show as much of it as humanly possible, because next time we'll take a look at another direct-to-video sequel that tells the grand story of The Lion King from a different point of view. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.